Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming along to this presentation on the Provincial Grand Lodge of Fife and Kinross on our Zoom meeting tonight. And we'll shortly receive a presentation from the Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason, Brother William Ramsay McGhee, on the way forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, everyone. Right, Worshipful Master, Provincial Grand Master, distinguished brethren all, it's a real pleasure indeed to be invited to address the Provincial Grand Lodge of Fife and Kinross at this particular time when we're still working our way through this horrendous pandemic that we've been experiencing. This evening, I have been asked to give you a perspective of Scottish Freemasonry post-COVID. Well, even at this stage, it's very difficult to say with any certainty where we will be a month from now, 6 months from now, or a year from now. However, let me try and give you some insight into where we hope to be. But before looking forward, I would first of all like to look back to try and give you some idea of some of the major changes that have helped evolve Scottish Freemasonry to where we are today, and learning from the past how we can move forward through the 21st century, continuing the work of our forefathers. Brethren, most of you are familiar with the name of our curator in the Grand Lodge of Scotland, Brother Robert L.D. Cooper. He has written many books and papers on Scottish Freemasonry, and is held to be a world authority on Freemasonry. Now, he has very forcibly made the point that modern Freemasonry, as we recognize it today, irrespective of which constitution we belong to, has its origins here in Scotland. That is, even though England and Ireland had Grand Lodges before we, the Scots, formed ours in 1736, some 19 years after England and 11 years after Ireland. The reason is perfectly simple. The Scots did not see any benefit in having a Grand Lodge. In fact, many of the lodges in existence prior to 1736 were very much opposed to the idea of having a Grand Lodge, as they basically feared that it would remove the autonomy that they enjoyed. Now, prior to the erection of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, there remains much evidence, some of which is in the custody of the Grand Lodge, that Masonry existed in Scotland as far back as 1598, when the first Shaw Statutes were produced in Edinburgh. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Shaw Statutes, let me explain that in 1583, William Shaw was appointed by King James VI, who became James I of England, as Master of the Work and Warden General, with the commission of reorganizing the Masonic craft. In 1598, he issued the first of the now famous Shaw Statutes, which set out the duties of all members to the lodge and to the public. These statutes were formally adopted in 1598 at a conference of Scottish lodges. The statute was agreed by all the Master Masons present, and arrangements were made to send a copy to every lodge in Scotland. More importantly, for Freemasons today, Shaw drew up a second statute in 1599. Now, the importance of this document lies in the fact that it makes the first veiled reference to the existence of esoteric knowledge within the craft of stone masonry. It also reveals that the Mother Lodge of Scotland, Lodge Mother Co-Winning No. 0, was in existence and active at that time. The impact of these statutes was dramatic. His instructions to all lodges stated that they must begin to keep written records, meet at specific times, test annually members in the art of memory, and enter apprentices in the lodge records. This meant that the lodges became fixed, permanent institutions. Now, we hold in Edinburgh the oldest surviving Masonic minute of a Scottish lodge, Lodge Aitchison's Haven, which dates to 1599, some 422 years ago. The Lodge of Edinburgh Mary's Chapel No. 1 still retain their records in their lodge room in Hill Street in Edinburgh, again going back to 1599. The same lodge can also boast the first record of the initiation of a non-operative Mason in a lodge in 1634. And to this day, the master at his installation takes his obligation on a Bible dated 1585. The foregoing, brethren, is only a fraction of the evidence that still exists, which shows that Scotland is the birthplace of Freemasonry as we know it today. Today, Scottish Freemasonry exists in over 40 countries, divided into districts, superintendencies, and individual lodges. We have 26 district grand lodges, 2 superintendencies, one in Malawi and one in Bermuda, and a further 19 lodges reporting directly to Grand Lodge. The Grand Lodge of Scotland is the governing body and is based at 96 George Street in Edinburgh. And sitting directly below Grand Lodge, we have 32 provincial Grand Lodges throughout the whole of Scotland, 26 district Grand Lodges scattered across the globe. Each province is a provincial Grand Master, and each district a district Grand Master. And I say, in addition, we have those 2 superintendencies in Bermuda and Malawi, with the other 19 lodges reporting directly. Now, uniquely in Scottish Freemasonry, each lodge in our constitution is a sovereign body with a considerable degree of control of their own affairs. I mentioned earlier that many of the lodges in existence prior to 1736 were very much opposed to the idea of having a Grand Lodge, as they feared it could remove their autonomy. In order to preserve their traditions, those early lodges were permitted to retain their own procedures, regalia, and distinctive rituals. Having accepted that the principle of independence of old lodges, it was impossible, therefore, to deny lodges founded after 1736 the same level of independence. Of course, our rituals must contain the principal points of each degree, but the scope for elaboration is considerable, with numerous interesting additions. Since Scottish lodges have the right to choose the colours of the lodge regalia, meetings are very colourful compared to other constitutions. From those early days of the Shaw Statutes, we have developed what are now known as the Constitution and Laws. The first edition was produced in 1836, and we are now on the 29th edition, and hopefully will progress to the 30th edition soon. In 1949 and again in 1968, the digest of rulings were issued, and in 1952, the first Grand Lodge yearbook was published. That takes us nicely to 2016, and the submission made by past substitute Grand Master Brother Alec Gilbraith. He produced the Strategic Review, which is now 5 years old, and to be perfectly blunt, while approved by Grand Committee, it has not moved, much to my frustration. At the Festival of St Andrew in 2018, I vowed to change that. I'm beginning to see a light at the end of the tunnel, but it has been a painfully slow progress. The main reason has been the fact that we need to change the Constitution and laws in order to implement the recommendations. It's imperative that we do so if we want to see Grand Lodge progress. During lockdown, we have made progress with the changes to the Constitution, and I'm cautiously hopeful that the final document will be presented to Grand Lodge whenever we can have a full meeting. If we don't get the agreement of Grand Lodge, it will put the whole project in an extremely difficult position. So it's essential that we get it right. What was proposed? The new style Grand Committee will take on a totally different look. First of all, Provincial Grand Masters will no longer be part of Grand Committee, and it would become far more streamlined than it is at present. But the one element that is more important for me is one that Brother Galbraith highlighted in the report. That is, we need to have brethren on Grand Committee who are there because of their skill, expertise, knowledge, or experience, not simply because they are popular and can amass more votes than anyone else. This is crucial. And to help us on our way, I have instigated one of the other recommendations, a register of interests, which is already proving its worth. But I'll come back to that later. The other main change will be that those wishing to put themselves forward for the elective positions in Grand Committee will be required to submit a photograph and a CV. Not a Masonic CV, but one which will highlight their areas of expertise. That said, it has been mooted in some of the responses we've had that we scrap Grand Committee altogether, streamline the administration, and devolve more responsibility to the provinces and districts. That's radical, but we maybe need radical. Albeit, I have had objections from a few brethren and from one province in particular about Provincial Grand Masters no longer being on a Grand Committee. But I must stress, brethren, that under the new system, Provincial Grand Masters will have a greater voice, a far greater voice than they do at present, and so will the District Grand Masters. And that's something they don't have at all at the moment. Now, since the days of Sir Archibald Donald R. Ewing, he set up the twice yearly meetings of Provincial Grand Masters. And I can tell you without any fear of contradiction that those meetings are first class. They're generally held in a hotel. It's a far more relaxed atmosphere. And after the meeting, we have lunch and the opportunity for everybody just to get together. And what we find is that, you know, there's an awful lot of good ideas come out of those meetings. Provincial Grand Masters get the opportunity to discuss problems and issues and see how other people have worked through those. And until now, there has been no minute kept of those meetings. Grand Secretary takes notes, but there's no formal minute. What is proposed is that those two meetings every year will become more formalized. And that's no bad thing. Because doing it that way will allow the Provincial Grand Masters to submit with some force any particular ideas, issues, or what have you that they have, direct into the new streamlined Grand Committee. Likewise, it will give the District Grand Masters now exactly the same opportunity, because the District Grand Masters, you know, if there's a silver lining to the COVID thing, it has been Zoom. Over the last year, I've managed to have 4 full-scale meetings with all the District Grand Masters, something that we could never, ever do before. And, you know, if COVID were to stop tomorrow, I'm confident that the Zoom meetings won't. They will be part of our future. And it will give us the opportunity to have the same 2 meetings per annum with District Grand Masters that we have with the Provincial Grand Masters. And their voice will be fed directly into Grand Committee. So I'm quite excited about that aspect of it, because it will undoubtedly give our provincial and district Grand Masters a far better, more collective voice to submit their issues, their ideas, and their proposals to Grand Committee. One aspect which has helped immensely in forming the overall strategy for taking us forward has been the result of the international survey which I commissioned in 2019. There is much information to be gleaned from the results of the strategy. And you know, as it sits at the moment, there's heaps of information that we haven't tapped into yet. But we have established the 5 main issues that have come from that particular survey. And I'm indebted to all brethren. As you can see there, we had over 7,500 responses, which in my view was first class. And I would thank each and every one of you who took the time to complete the survey, because the results have been very, very helpful indeed. But the five main issues coming out have been membership sustainability, how to address aging membership and how best to attract and retain new members. Secondly, how do we support lodges that are struggling? The third one, very important, how do we modernise Scottish Freemasonry, yet at the same time preserve our traditions? Fourthly, and this too is mega important, how do we improve our public image? And finally, how do we look to the future of external charity giving? Those are the main topics that come out. To move those issues forward, I have firstly had a meeting with all provincial Grand Masters. Secondly, I had a meeting with all district Grand Masters. And thirdly, I had a meeting with those brethren who are the future of Scottish Freemasonry, brethren, all of whom are under 40 years of age. And all 3 groups have been charged to respond to the 5 issues from their provinces and districts. And likewise, the young Masons have responded through those who acted as facilitators on the day and by sending personal responses to the issues. But where are those responses going? Well, I've established 5 working groups to study each issue, evaluate the responses, and report to the administration committee in due course. Each of those working groups is made up of brethren from the Register of Interests, a representative from Grand Committee, and representation from the provinces and the districts. Grand Secretary and I have tried to ensure that we have people with the right skill base in each group. Of course, it would not be Grand Lodge if we didn't have the moaning and the criticism. I've been accused of setting up non-constitutional groups by a very small minority, I should add. But brethren, the working parties are no more than the name implies. They have no decision-making capabilities. That lies in the first instance with the administration committee, which is totally constitutional. The working parties are fully in line with Brother Galbraith's recommendations in the 2016 report, with their built-in expertise to prepare reports and using their expertise, their experience, their knowledge to submit those reports for the administration committee to consider. Now, the members of the administration committee will make the decisions and recommendations to Grand Committee. The smaller, leaner Grand Committee would be able to work quicker, smarter, and more efficiently. I envisage that the reports and recommendations to Grand Lodge will be far more succinct and pertinent. If I remember correctly, Brother Galbraith envisaged the new Grand Committee meeting 5 times a year. To make things happen timelessly, I will have no problem at all with Grand Committee meeting every month if necessary, certainly in the early days of its formation. Of course, the Grand Lodge of Scotland prides itself on the fact that it is a truly democratic organisation, and that will hopefully never ever change. But I would be looking to Brother Galbraith and those who assisted him to possibly meet again with a view, among other things, to look at what areas Grand Lodge would be happy to delegate to Grand Committee to make instant and necessary decisions, so that we can move away from the tedious system that has been in place for decades and it takes forever to make decisions. Just to give you one instance, when I was Deputy Grand Master, under the instruction of the then Grand Master Mason, Brother Charles Ian Woolridge Gordon of Esselman, I set out to revitalise the proxy district Grand Master system. It was something that without the current system I could probably have achieved in a month at most. Brethren, it took over 2 years. And since then, Brother Jim Jack has been battling on to revitalise the remainder of the system. That is just not good enough in the 21st century. Next, I want to take a brief look at technology. As was discussed at the European Grand Masters Conference in 2019, we must embrace the latest technology. While we fully accept that there are potential dangers with all the various forms of social media, we must also acknowledge that there is much to gain from social media as well. Again, I'm in the process of appointing experts in the field to move the Grand Lodge of Scotland into the 21st century in terms of technology. Jimmy Young has worked miracles with the database and has made great strides forward. We've now appointed a new IT manager who's already making great progress. I've still to finish writing it tonight, but the update, this week's update, will be out a day early because at long last we are getting the new fibre optic cable into Grand Lodge this weekend. So the IT systems in Grand Lodge will effectively be down on Friday. So the update is coming out hopefully tomorrow. In that context, we have changed our IT provider. The new provider has wired the building for Wi-Fi, high-speed data, and so forth. But we have, to be perfectly honest with you, been totally frustrated by the subcontractor who's been engaged to bring that fibre optic cable into the building. If my memory serves me correctly, I think the first date we had was that it would be installed in the 26th of November last year. And here we are in June, nearly, and we still haven't got the cable in. But I'm really looking forward to this weekend. And if that happens this weekend as they promised, then the system will become so much better. Another exciting development for me is that the heads of orders have tasked the Grand Secretaries or equivalent of each order to work together to see how we can best achieve a fully integrated database, so that, among other things, a new initiate into a lodge will be able to be traced throughout his Masonic career. Other issues that we are seriously considering making us fit for purpose include the following. Our public image. I invited two brethren from the United Grand Lodge of England to attend the last but one strategy meeting to update us on their progress with such issues. The United Grand Lodge of England have resources that we can't afford, so it's good to make use of the lessons that they've learned. That information that we got from them is now being considered by our strategy group. One thing that has come out of the survey very strongly is that we need to be far more family orientated. We need to provide events, facilities, and information for our families. Those of you who have had the opportunity to visit lodges in many of our districts will have experienced the fact that they are much better at this kind of thing than we tend to be at home. Again, the strategy group will hopefully present a range of ideas on this subject to the administration committee for their consideration. Likewise, we need to get more involved in our communities. Now, I am well aware that this province do very well in that sense, but in general terms, we need all provinces and districts to take a lead in this and encourage lodges to have, for example, a presence at local Highland Games, gala days and such like. We need to promote open day events. And as we have witnessed during the pandemic, there is a continuing need to support our communities in the many ways we have. Brotherly love and relief being displayed in a very pragmatic way. The strategy group met on the 27th of April and then they met this week again. And as I mentioned, they have heard the presentation from the United Grand Lodge of England, and at which they have now begun to formalise final reports to the administration committee. Now, without preempting their findings, and believe me, this is only a very small selection of the myriad of information that they're working through, I would suggest that they may well be looking at advocating things like shorter meetings, making far better use of technology to circulate minutes and correspondence, to smarten up the degree work, meeting flexibility, to consider having the odd meeting at a different time and a different day, transport, to offer to collect members who no longer drive, activities, widen the range of activities that we have at the present, activities such as barbecues, sports nights, inter-lodge activities and competitions to further raise funds jointly and promote joint projects. Appoint possibly a younger Mason as a charity champion. His duty would be to connect with Masons of all ages and identify activities and charities that appeal to them. Create something like, I don't know, a Friends of Lodge Oak group or something like that, that involves family and non-Masons. Younger Masons in particular would like to be far more involved with their families and friends together within the Masonic scenario. Networking. We need to provide opportunities to improve networking for different groups of shared interests. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that we have elitist type lodges. That is not the case at all. But one of the points that came out of the English discussions was that, for example, we have a very active Widows' Sons organisation in Scotland. So we look at promoting events or bits and pieces that would engage the Widows' Sons. We might have people who are really heavily involved in collecting Masonic tokens, that type of thing. So we boost that up and give them an opportunity to network far more so than we do at the moment. And, you know, the number of groups that you could have like that are only limited by the imagination. Leadership training. We have many very good and capable brethren in the craft. But by the same token, the leadership qualities of others is, through no fault of their own, lacking. We need to provide, as a matter of some urgency, essential training, advice and guidance to ensure that the organisation flourishes through good and effective leadership at all levels. Information sharing. It concerns me that many brethren are unaware of what's going on. We had many of the young Masons telling us that they only heard of the under-40s meeting by accident, as lodge secretaries hadn't passed on the information. Likewise, many brethren have never seen the weekly COVID updates. They are never circulated to members. It's essential, therefore, that we look at ways of circulating information to the individual as well as the more conventional way. One possibility is the introduction of a Masonic App, which, provided it's properly thought through and designed, would have many advantages. It would have advantages, for example, of bringing brethren together, allowing brethren to interconnect, have chat rooms, have access to a myriad of information, be able to receive information from Grand Lodge directly. They'll be able to see what other Scottish Masons around the world are doing. And importantly, it would be a learning app for new Masons of all ages. And those are only some of the advantages. On the downside, much care would need to be taken over security. But I think at the end of the day, advantages would outweigh the disadvantages. And we do have a wee subgroup looking at that right at this moment in time. Finally, I suppose one question that you were all wanting answered this evening: when can we start opening lodges again? Well, right now, the short answer is, I don't know. But the heads of orders are meeting again on Wednesday, the 9th of June, to reappraise the situation. Now, the government published at the beginning of April a document which lays down indicative dates for a return to something resembling normality. Now, what's on the screen just now is just a small part of that document, but it does offer a glimmer of hope that we could, subject to all the other restrictions of social distancing, wearing of masks, no singing, the progress of the vaccination programme, and so on, see a return to physical meetings reasonably soon. If you want to read the full document, the link is shown at the bottom of the screen there. There will be much work to be done prior to lodges opening, and many of us have gone through the process with reopening of churches. Thanks to the work of the Strategy Working Party and the support of the Admin Committee and Grand Committee, Grand Lodge has issued guidance to all lodges. Of course, if nothing else, COVID has produced a crop of so-called experts who never existed 12 months ago. We were, within 24 hours of issuing the document, criticised for not promoting the use of equipment to circulate air. Can I stress, brethren, that the guidance is simply that? The Strategy Committee have taken necessary advice and have produced what we feel will allow us to open safely. Above all, the overarching consideration is the health and safety of our members. That is paramount. The guidance document that we have issued is dynamic. As new information and advice come to hand, it will be circulated. We are hell-bent on leaving no stone unturned to make a return to meetings as safe as it possibly can be. Brethren, I hope that I've been able to give you some idea of where we have been, where we are, and where we are going. We are on a journey, and it's imperative that we all work together to ensure the success of the journey. We just don't know what we will encounter once we get back, but hopefully the work that is ongoing at present will give us all that assurance that we will be able to overcome all the difficulties and take this great fraternity of ours through the 21st century in as strong and vibrant way as is humanly possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason, for that, I think, very enlightening presentation. Again, can I thank you, Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason, for your presentation. I'm sure the brethren found something good in this, quite informative, covering many topics. I know the topics that you had planned there, Most Worshipful Grand Master Mason. There's always others come in, but you've answered them well. I think everyone's probably quite satisfied with the responses. So thank you very much for doing that. I know you're a very busy man, not just in your Masonic world, but locally. You're involved in a lot of different organisations in your local area. So it says a lot that you gave up your time tonight to come along to be in the province of Fife and Kinross, albeit virtually. But good to see you've given up your time and give us the support, and we really appreciate it. We really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Ramsay.
Thank you.